What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the Bearded Comic Bro, and I am joined by comic creator Briana Loewinsohn. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm so
A-
excited to be with you.
Absolutely. At the beginning of the year, I kind of posted. I was like, "Oh, who are some creators you all would like to have me on the show?" And Jordan Morris, who's been on the show, instantly recommended. He's like, "You've got to check Briana's book out," and so I was like, "Let's do it then."
That
So.
guy's the best.
Yeah, he is. So,
Yeah.
uh, how did before we hop into Raised by Ghosts, which is out right now, people can go pick it up, and
Yes.
I recommend it. And if you don't pick it up, if this doesn't inspire you, this interview should. So, um,
Right.
but before we talk about that, how did you get into comics? Did you always have a love for comics growing up, or was this just something kind of later in life?
Yeah, no, I was basically raised on comics, I would say. My parents were like kind of wild hippies, and my pops would read me comic books instead of children's books. So every night at bedtime at his house, I would get some type of comic, and it could be like Linda Berry or like Matt Groening, Life in Hell, or it could be some weird comic from the 30s, or it Calvin and Hobbes. So a huge like variety. So I really loved like how every artist had their own style, and some were serious and some were funny. And I've always loved comics. And then I got really into reading indie comics when I was a teenager. And I always had loved to draw, like drawing was sort of my thing. And then when I was in college is when I started making comics. So I was probably 20 years old, right around 2000. I started making comics as part of my classwork, much to the dismay of my teachers and fellow classmates who didn't think that they was a real art form. And I've just been making them ever since.
That's fantastic. So it kind of inspired you from an early age, then it started
Yeah.
to go into college. Where was this then the idea of like, okay, I want to start to create? Because Raised by Ghosts, I believe, is your second novel, right?
Yeah, it's my second full-length novel, but for a really long time I made they're called zines now, but
Yeah.
we used to call them mini comics. So,
Okay.
you'd copy them at the copy mat, staple them, sell them for 50 cents. So I did that for a long time. So I have a lot of little zines.
Okay. And where was it then like for you to kind of say like this is something I want to pursue, looking forward to going into a full length, you had your
Right.
mini comics. Where was it where you're like, I'm going to try this kind of into a full length form?
Yeah. So I had made these mini comics, and then I made the fateful decision to have children. And that really took me out of the comics game for a few years. Much as I love my kids. It was really hard. I'm also a full-time high school teacher. So it was hard to do all of those things. So what happened to me, and I know that it's terrible, but it was the pandemic. The pandemic hit, and I was teaching from this very classroom that I'm in right now, on Zoom. And my best friend, who I also teach with, is named Tin Pham, and he's a cartoonist as well. We met through comics, and we've been teaching together for almost 20 years. And the pandemic hit, so we would when it first happened, I texted him and I was like, "Bro, let's do a daily comic. It'll be so fun. It'll be 2 weeks. It's gonna be so cute." He's like, "All right, let's do it." So we started our little daily comic strip that was supposed to last 2 weeks, and then it obviously kept going. And but it was really fun, and we did it for 100 days, and then I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's the bane of my existence. So we quit that. But what we had worked into our life was this really excellent like practice of drawing every day, this like commitment to making comics every day. And so we both actually decided to start our memoirs that we'd always wanted to tell. So I wrote Ephemera, which came out in 2023 from Fantagraphics, and Tin wrote Family Style, which is a really beautiful graphic memoir that won the Eisner that year for memoirs. So
Nice.
we wrote those books together. And that's sort of what got me back into comics, was having all that time during the pandemic, that we didn't have, and the commitment. My kids were old enough. I had, so I just have just sort of integrated comics back into my life.
Yeah. So let's hop into Raised by Ghosts then. If
Okay.
people are listening to this and they haven't gone to their local bookstore yet and gotten this book,
Mhm.
what is it about?
Okay, so Raised by Ghosts is about high school in the 1990s. So it's semi-autobiographical. Some things are directly from my life, and then there's some sort of more fantastical parts of it. Um, but when we were in high school, I don't know about you, but we used to write notes. It was pre-cell phone, pre
Yeah.
laptop. So we would write each other notes, then fold them very intricately, and then exchange them. And this was a huge way of communicating and also preventing yourself from being bored in class.
Mhm.
Um, and I saved all my notes from high school. So I have like garbage bags filled with these notes. And I just felt like this was such a really unique part of life that I don't think has been documented enough.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to do something with it. So that was like what started it. So um, it's about being a teenager in the 90s, that isolation you feel. It's really like it's meant for teenagers, but I think anyone who lived through the 90s will enjoy it. But it is about that isolation and that disconnect you can feel as a teenager, and how writing notes and getting in touch with yourself and getting in touch with your friends can help you kind of put your pieces together.
Yeah. What's interesting about this book too, the way it's written, is there's a lot of breakups in the story that feel like just like I opened up a note, like you passed me a note right here, and you're like, here, read this, and
Yeah.
it flows so well into this kind of idea that you're getting the image of kind of like setting where you're at, but the note is just we're reading one big note taking us through this whole journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So I really wrestled with how I wanted to use the concept of notes in the book.
Mhm.
So I was like, were they just going to be plot driven and you wouldn't even ever read a note? Like, was it going to be about notes and how that they pass through our hands? Or was it going to be like narration at the top of each comic panel? I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. So what I did was I ended up making it totally separate so that you have a vignette of life in the comic panels, and then you have a note that accompanies it. And the intention for that was that what we would write in a note was so different from all the things that were going on in our lives, and I wanted to sort of like fill in the gaps of what was between the lines, or in the scene, like the note might fill in what's between the panels.
Yeah. And it's interesting for me, like going back and reading this, of getting to kind of see those moments of nostalgia, a little bit of like, digging through a CD store, a
Yeah,
record store,
yeah,
and finding a
yeah.
CD. My kids don't even know what that concept
Uh,
is, or
like
or
why you
how.
would spend time doing that.
Yes. And which I've after reading this book, it kind of made me realize like that is why I think I gravitate towards comics so much, because that's something that is so nostalgic that still exists, of like digging through something
Yeah,
and finding like, oh, did you see this? Like, this is such a
right.
good one, and brings back memories. But I feel like there's a generation that has missed out on that, and missed out on like those moments of like the prestige of like taking the exact moment to try and hit the record button on a to make the perfect
Yeah,
mixtape off of the radio and stuff like
that's right.
that. And
You had to get that one song without any extra airtime.
yeah, and like there's I think, but that's you notice in there is there's a love and there's a passion and like of cultivating like, did I do that? Like, because you can't just remove the song from your playlist like you can now on all
Yeah,
these
just
things.
drag and
So
drop. There was no
right.
drag and drop.
So like I think like what I think comes across in this story a lot too is like just the personalness of the whole story, right? The notes, but even like the personalness of having a mixtape made for someone, and like making
Yeah,
curating the perfect mixtape for someone.
right,
So
right.
like you kind of list your perfect mixtape. What was that kind of experience of like kind of reliving those nostalgic moments?
I mean, this was really like a book, an act of love. Like
Mhm.
I like it really in the front of the book, I like have a disclaimer that this is not a love story, but this is a love letter. And it really is just like a love letter to those times, like that, all that, because we're sort of like the Gen Y Oregon Trail generation where we grew up analog, but we got digital
Yeah.
while we were teenagers. So it's a love letter to that. It's a love letter to just like the friends that you make when you're young. And it's a love letter just to teenagers and how hard that is. But it was pretty great, like doing all the research, because the last book I did, Ephemera, was not set in real life. It was sort of set in a dream world. Whereas this book, I wanted to do the opposite, where I wanted to make it be like exactly what every room looked like. I went and found like photographs from our high school, which has now been torn down and rebuilt. So like I had to look through all these old things and like ask some people like, what did you used to wear on, for this thing, and get actual items to really get that. I think that that's what for me was so fun, and I think makes it like feel so tangible.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too that is this book is beautifully drawn too. Like there's so much love and passion, you can see in the story, and where you take the story and things like that towards the end of those moments. Where did you kind of start to develop your art style for like, what you decide like this is how I want to be a creator?
Yeah, like so I switch up my drawing style for comics. So if you pick up Raised by Ghosts and you pick up Ephemera, they're just two totally different drawing styles. I think going back to when I was a little kid, getting read all these comics that looked so different, I think that that is what I really like is experimenting with style. So I think that that's part of it. For this one specifically, there's I wanted it to feel like a note. So like if you opened a page of the comic, you might feel like the images were from a note. So instead of using like an ink pen, it's a number 6 pencil. So it has like heavy pencil marks and it's kind of rough and scratchy, almost like someone drew it on a piece of paper in a hurry. So that was sort of like the aesthetic of that choice. And then I wanted it to sort of feel like aged and old. So it sort of has like a yellowy tint to it.
Yeah. Did you have artists and creators that you kind of honed in on that that inspired you growing up and when you started to kind of get into comics more?
Yeah, there have been a lot of really inspirational comics. I mean, I would say that I learned to draw from drawing Calvin and Hobbes and just obsessively trying to figure out how he made his marks. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever really achieved copying his style, Bill Watterson's style.
Right.
Um, but other big like artistic influences were like Nemo in Slumberland. I always forget that guy's name, but
My
although
my best friend, he's a big fan of Nemo and
Winsor
Submarine,
McKay,
and
is
it's
that his
gonna drive
name?
me.
Winsor McKay. That's who
Okay.
it is.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, Winsor McKay, his line work has really been influential. And then I love the darkness of like Edward Gorey and Charles Adams. Like I love just that really dry, dark sensibility. And I love with Linda Berry, I really love her honesty and her kind of putting it all out there, but in this way that's like totally personal. And she just gets to create the story how she wanted to create it. So I think my storytelling is a little mishmash of all those guys.
Yeah. You in the story you kind of go about, you mentioned it earlier too, of like it, it's a love letter to, you know, to a time. It was a love letter to trying to figure out who you are as a person, and kind of almost a sense of like trying to find your community. It felt like of, who are your people and what is your escape from reality
Yeah.
too and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Was it hard for you to kind of take personal stuff and because this is like, I think you've said it's a
Yeah.
semi-autobiographical. Is it hard to kind of utilize that and put that into your writing and art, or is it easier for you?
You know, I think it actually comes pretty easy to me. And I think it's because I'm like not a hand wringer. Like I'll just make a decision really fast. So I wasn't until like maybe yesterday. So the book's been out for about a week and I was like, oh, did I want to get that personal? Like, and it's like, I've been working on this for like 2 years. I can't believe that this is the first time I was like, maybe consider whether you want to do this or not. I just kind of go headstrong into things. Um, but it was, I mean, I really like writing about memoir stuff. I find I like that I get to tell the story because I'm not like stepping on anyone else's perspective. It's just how I feel. So that that feels nice. And then it was hard. So I don't have any of my notes that I wrote because I gave them to whoever they were going to. I'm sure they're in a landfill somewhere. um, but I do have one journal from high school and it spans freshman year to senior year. So it's like a pretty good capsule and it's pretty horrific. It is so embarrassing. And that was definitely like, oh boy, that's rough to read. But I tried to encapsulate some of the just complete narcissism of my teenage self in the book, that it's
Yeah.
just all about what I'm experiencing.
Is it hard to go back and like with your memories you have of high school and middle school to go back of like and have to look at writing it maybe from the standpoint of how you experienced it rather than maybe how you would have wanted to experience things or something with that
It was
knowledge?
Yeah, it was one of the things that I was talking to a friend about the book and I was talking about the middle school section and I was trying to like talk to her about the feelings that I experienced. And she said, it really wasn't that people were bullying me for the most part. It was that I just didn't exist or something like that. And like that to me was like, that's exactly what I've been trying to say. Like the whole time with the middle school section is like, it just was like I wasn't even I wasn't even there. And so, um, there were some like sort of profound moments that I felt from that and upon like looking back on it in a nostalgic way and then also trying to think, but how did I actually feel about these moments and trying to think back to what felt like an honest representation
Yeah.
of old times.
So you do mention in your book, you throw out your mixtape at one point.
Hmm.
You talk about going to concerts and there's a page and I just luckily flipped to it. Right where you just list off all these bands. Like it's just
Yeah.
as a note listed of all these bands.
Yeah.
Um, did music inspire you when you were writing this? Like, or are you like, were you able to listen to music while you were writing and drawing, or it was like, no, I had to have silence when I create.
Well,
Like,
no, I loved listening to music. It was really fun. And I didn't even, maybe it was like, maybe I'd already gotten pretty, not pretty far into the book, but somewhat into the book when someone said to me, hey, you should listen to music from that time while you're drawing. And I was like, what a great idea. But I did, yeah, it was really fun having that music on. Or I would watch movies from the 90s and have those on in the background. That was also really fun.
all right, I have to ask then, like, what are your some of your go-to 90s music and movies then when you were writing?
Well, my number one movie of all time is White Men Can't Jump. So that is
Yeah.
going to be in there. Um, and then some other 90s movies. Like I showed my kids Reality Bites. That was really fun because that's such an iconic 90s movie. And like Clueless was like, when that came out, we were so excited. And Airheads was really, we loved Airheads. And then like any of the 90s, Quentin Tarantino was huge for us. Um, so those were, I mean, I watched a lot of old movies too, but as to like what
Yeah.
movies came out in the 90s, those were big. And then for music, so I grew up in the Bay Area. So we were very into Green Day. Um, so Green Day was huge and then Tupac was huge. So those are probably like the two biggest musical artists that I think of when I think of like something that would always be on a mixtape that I
Mhm.
made.
Yep.
And then we also listened to like a lot of local bands. So that was also kind of fun because there was just in the Bay Area, there was so many venues and so many underage or all ages clubs that you could go and just like see live music. So it was pretty fun.
Yeah. One
Yeah.
of the things too I noticed in kind of the promotional aspect of this book is you had a handful of friends create mixtapes that
Yeah.
you shared. Like where did that idea kind of come about?
So yeah, I've been having cartoonists make these mixtapes and then coming up, spoiler alert for next week, it's going to start to be characters from the book. I've reached out to the people who are in the book and had them make mixtapes. So you'll get to like see the actual characters and like what they would have made. Um, I was asked to do a mixtape project for this really cool website called Large Hearted Boy, where he asks authors to create a mixtape and then you annotate it. So why are you choosing this song? And it was perfect because my book has music in it so much. And then my best friend Tin Pham was like, "Hey, what if you did that as a project for Instagram?" And you could ask people to make a mixtape. And I was like, oh my God, I love it. And then I started asking everyone to also include a high school photo. So you got to see like Raina Telgemeier and what she looked like, as a teenager and all these fun cartoonists. So that's been really fun.
Yeah, it's absolutely been great. And I got to say, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so good. Um, what is what's something that you hope people take away when they read this or experience this book that you created?
I think one big thing is I hope for the teenagers who read it, I really hope that they just find some kind of solace that they aren't alone, this is a hard time, like acknowledgement that like they're in this hard time of their life. Um that they are going to get through it. So that's probably the biggest thing for me. I mean, for the older crowd, for the people like my age, I hope that people just like love the nostalgia. I tried to be super accurate to like my memory of what the 90s were like, not like a cartoon version of it. So I'm hoping that people like are enjoying like all the little details that are put throughout it. But really also just trying to love yourself and find human connection in the
Yeah.
world.
Well, and I think one of those parts of the story that I found interesting, it feels like there comes a turning point in your story where you kind of find like your escape and that writing and creating is kind of an escape for you.
Yeah.
Um, how does like how important was that for you as a teen, like to kind of find like that escape for you?
Yeah, I mean, um, I think the big things that were important for me was finding art and writing,
Yeah.
as well as finding people who I felt that human connection with. So I think those were like the really big parts for me. And that's sort of what the book is about. It has all these like disparate parts in the beginning where it's vignettes and the notes are separate. And then this thing happens. And then in the end of the book, everything is mushed together. And because my family was the way that it was, we sort of all lived these parallel lives in the same, near each other, but no one was really connecting. That finding this like group of people who I really, really loved and finding an outlet for my inner thoughts that I couldn't really express very well was, yeah, that's sort of what was so important.
Yeah, and what I love is just like and as I flip through this, you have so many like you mentioned references that you tried to make sure stayed up of like a
Mhm.
Far Side cartoon on the
Mhm.
fridge,
It was on our fridge when I was a little kid.
or you're a good man Charlie Brown and things like that throughout the movie. Like, were those were those particular like well you just said it was on your fridge,
Mhm.
like things that like really stood out to you as some a memory, or were there some of those that like the good you're a good man Charlie Brown things that you kind of like a time you caught that time and place and you kind of integrated that into
Right.
the story?
Right. There were some moments where it's sort of more like this is like we go to a show at
Mhm.
and watch some bands play, and that's sort of more like this is generally what it was like when we would go to a show. Like for me, that wasn't a specific band. The You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown scene was an actual event that occurred, but upon retrospect, I was informed it was not You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. It was the spelling bee one. So,
Oh,
but
oh,
I am going to have to write an addendum to this book. And I believe instead of walking away, I threw a shoe at them and then walked away. So I didn't put that into the book. Um, so some of them are very specific.
okay. How much does that play into it? Like, when you're writing something that is real life, like then when people get their hands on, it, like that's not how I remember.
Yeah, I mean, so my best friend Jacob, who's a main character in the book, has an almost photographic memory. So I did use him a lot
Okay.
for reference, like what he ate at lunch. I was like, "What did you eat at lunch?" And he's like, "Oh, I could tell you exactly." It's like he really, or he could be like, "You weren't wearing that at this thing." Like he just has like an amazing, amazing memory, which was like for better or worse. Like a lot of times I would use it, and then sometimes I'd be like, "I know you said this is what happened, but I'm going to do it differently." And he'd
I'm
be
gonna
like, yeah. He was
it
like, I'm
needs
gonna have to write a book to refute all your lies.
that's so
Um,
good.
yeah, so it was, I mean, but really it's so fun having
Yeah.
someone who remembers things so well. And I think he's the only person I know who has like that good a memory, so I'm not worried about the rest of it.
You're like, oh, trust me, it's how it was. So
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
well, I hate to ask, if you got anything else that you wanted to talk about or promote, but since Raised by Ghosts just came out, but is there anything that you or past stuff that you want to encourage people to check out or
Yeah.
current things you got coming out?
Yeah, I got a lot of stuff. So I hope everyone checks out Raised by Ghosts. I really love it. It's like a piece of my heart, and I hope everyone gets it. Ephemera, I feel like is a really great compliment. It's more of an adult graphic novel, but it's like really quiet and dreamy and perfect gift for Mother's Day for people who have sad mom stories. A lot of plants and a lot of sad moms and daughters. Um, and then I've been doing a piece for KQED, so you can check that out in the Bay Area KQED website, but about cafes that have closed in the Bay Area as well as movie theaters. So I've been sort of working on like trying to commemorate all these establishments that we don't have anymore. And those are all in the same style as Raised by Ghosts. And I'm thinking about maybe turning that into a longer book.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, before I let you go, what goes into crafting a perfect mixtape?
Oh, okay. Well, I feel like people have a lot of opinions. I would like to know what your opinions on a perfect mixtape are. Do you have
Yeah.
do you have a vibe? Did you have a vibe like this is the type I used to make?
So it depended on who it was for, right? If it was
Okay.
for me, it was
Yeah, if
really
it's for
whatever
you, like
for
just
me.
for you, not for like a person you're
Okay.
trying to woo.
Okay. So it was I made I made mixtapes for to get me pumped up for my sporting events. So that was
Okay.
very much how I, so my mindset for most of mine was like before a wrestling match or something, I would curate. So it was like, this was like your, because it's a little later in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, like a Linkin Park and
Oh, pumped up party bed.
but even going like old school though, with like you always have to have like an Eye of the Tiger. It's
Yeah, yeah,
finding
yeah,
that balance of like you've got to get that. There's almost like a rhythm for like if it's a pump up mixtape, like
yeah.
you need to have it, but you can't always stay
Can't
up.
stay at level 11 the whole
Gotta you
time.
gotta kind of
Yeah.
bring it down so that way when the other song hits, you're like, all right, I'm jacked up. So
Oh, I love it.
there's it's a balance.
Yeah. I think there are people who make truly good mixtapes. So for instance, like I still have some that Jacob had made me, and I had another friend, Greg, who made great mixtapes. Um, my style was like totally all over the place, much
Oh,
like
okay.
my eclectic taste in comics. I would put like 10,000 Maniacs, and then I would put like Hit 'em Up by Tupac. I like to just like really, you don't know where I'm coming from next. I want it to feel crazy, which I feel like why like music now and the way we consume it has actually worked perfectly because I just want a million different things to like follow each other. So that's really my aesthetic, but I know that is not like good mixtape behavior.
Yeah, but there is something about where you can just go from Tupac to all of a sudden like just Mariah Carey for
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
reason,
We're
like
just putting Enya on
any,
next.
yeah, like, and it just it's a bop and you're just like, I'm here for it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um
I like a wild ride.
yeah, I mean that's like collecting comics, right? There's everywhere from Daniel Klaus to, you know, uh
Yeah.
Batman. Like, like
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
it's all good. So, well, where can people follow along with you, stay up to date with what you're creating, and get to see some of these things that you talk about that are going to be dropping.
Yeah. I am on Instagram. I'm very easy to find on the internet because my name is so difficult to spell. But if you even attempt to mash the keyboard and spell Briana Loewinsohn, it should come up pretty fast. But my Instagram is Briana Breaks. And I post pretty frequently. I post a lot of new content and fun drawings and stuff. So I hope people check it out. If you have questions about comics, I would love to answer them. Or if you want to write me a note, I would love one.
Yes. Yes. And I don't even know if I thought I did, but this is out from Fantagraphics, which puts out
Yeah.
some of my favorite comics. So, um, I I got to ask them real quick, how'd you get connected with them? Because they make so much good comics.
Yeah, they made my last book too, and I
Yeah.
actually just sent it to them. I sent
Oh wow.
them,
Nice.
yeah, I just kind of don't have an agent or anything. I just had I had like 50 pages done, so a really good chunk. And then I had a one sheet that told them what was going to happen in the story so they could understand how it was going to end. Because I think that that's a lot of if publishers are going to pick up a book, they want to make sure you can finish it because a lot of people can start a comic, but they can't finish it. So I just sent them that and it just went really well for me. And then once Ephemera did pretty well, they were like, okay, great. So when I went to pitch this book, I was like, hey, I have this idea. And they're like, sure, perfect. And I like, it was super easy. So I think they trusted that I'd be able to make it happen. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with them. They're so
Yeah.
nice and they make such beautiful books.
They do. And I mean, again, it comes out great. The book, it looks beautiful. This is fantastic. Gang, if you are listening or watching the YouTube video, go check out Raised by Ghosts. You're gonna love it. It's fantastic. And Brianna, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about
Thank you
comics
so
with me.
much. This was so fun. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
absolutely. And gang, with that being said, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.
Yeah, let's be nerds.